Jim Coyne. I have the moniker Coyne the Round on social media. I'm an independent scholar, emeritus professor at the University of Pennsylvania Medical Center, Department of Psychiatry, where I was tenured professor of psychology in psychiatry with a lot of other titles.
I first came across your work because, as you know, or listeners and viewers will know, I do a lot of research on criticizing or being quite critical of positive psychology, so-called happiness science, and this sort of thing. And so I came across some of your work on the role of positive thinking in cancer. And I wondered if you could give one message to the people watching, what would it be about positive psychology? Is this something that we should embrace, or is this something we should be careful about?
Well, first off, I'm not negative psychology. I'm just a realist. And I think that some of the tenets of positive psychology that have been presented to us are more appropriate to certain contexts than others. And that some of the tenets are preached with an agenda to, it's kind of like an opioid of the people. And you want to calm people and you want to give them directions that if they are distressed, they should immediately seek consultation with a positive psychology advisor or a therapist. And I think it's conformist. And I think particularly from people from different backgrounds like myself, at some point it becomes toxic.
You are not just a critic of positive psychology, but you're also critical of some other things that sort of get passed around in the media and in policy as being, just straightforwardly listen to the experts. Can you tell me about the blog post that you put out today?
Yeah, I was particularly interested. I rediscovered an old clip of a Dutch Olympic swimmer who won the Olympics, and he first got back into swimming at 19 after he had been diagnosed with leukemia. And so when he won the Olympics in 2008, everybody started comparing him to Lance Armstrong. And Lance Armstrong was sort of the cultural hero back then. We didn't know that he doped or that he cheated. And we only know him as a champion of mind over matter. And he claimed that he approached his cancer in the same way that he approached a coming bicycling competition. And back then I had found a clip from The Onion, and I had mocked him as saying that he was demanding a rematch with his cancer. It was from The Onion. That was satirical, but it was I was trying to get at the absurdity of the fight metaphor. Because the problem with the fight metaphor is that somebody can lose for reasons that have nothing to do with their efforts. And cancer isn't just. Cancer isn't controlled by the mind. And a realistic perspective involves us embracing that.
Where did this idea come from, this notion that you could use positive thinking or some sort of mental pathway to, making headway on cancer? One of the lines in one of your papers that has always stuck with me is positive psychology's relevance to cancer care is something like a myth that will not die. Do you remember writing that?
Sure. And I think we need our illusions, but we should have two minds about us. One, that we need direction and we need morale. But on the other hand, we need not to get into foolishness or unnecessary defeat. And sometimes for me, from my background, I've always felt that it wasn't important that you win because that could be beyond your control, but you were responsible for the quality of your effort. And I think the same thing with cancer. It's how you live, not that whether you live longer. And I certainly know friends of mine like Barbara Ehrenreich, who made the decision not to continue her cancer treatment when her cancer metastasized, because she judged that the quality of the resulting life would make it not worth living.
There's this idea, and this is what Ehrenreich criticizes in her work, or criticized in her work, which was that if you just kind of put on enough pink and wore enough ribbons and had the right attitude, that you would somehow have a better chance of recovering. And she really didn't like that. And she didn't like the idea also that you were supposed to use cancer as a kind of narrative to in a positive narrative in out of which you're supposed to develop meaning in your life. And she really rejected that. She found it to be quite meaningless. And I've read a lot of this kind of literature that says what winds up happening is patients who don't develop that kind of narrative, the one that we like to hear, right? The one that is exciting and moves forward and overcoming adversity becomes a reason for being. And people who don't adopt that, who see, the possibility of death as a disruption to one's narrative and an incredible source of meaninglessness, become bad patients. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about that, about those kinds of critiques, that it sort of sorts us into good patients and bad patients. And Ehrenreich sort of says that the end result is that you become responsible for your own suffering.
Exactly. But I think Barbara Ehrenreich is very layered in her approach to things, and that's what really impresses me. Before she wrote Right-Sided, or what was published in England as Smile or Die, she wrote Nickel and Dimed. And what she had done is she had gotten frustrated with the abusiveness of her PhD program. She finished up, and then she went and worked at Kmart. And she decided to understand what that experience was like. And she had the full support of her husband. But the deal was that she would go there and not have any money from him because she had lived like a poor person. And I think there's a kind of quiet Marxism about it all, in the sense, not revolutionary, but in the sense of a skepticism about the order, and particularly about neoliberalism. And that's the way I bonded with her is I was sitting at home in Philadelphia, and I got a call from her saying that she had just finished an interview with Marty Seligman, and he insisted to be at the Philadelphia Art Museum. It was dreadful, and she really needed a drink. And I drink. I said, I sure did. And I knew a great place to get some bourbon on the water in back of there. And so I met with her for hours, and we struck up a relationship. And we started meeting in various places, and gradually some other people started coming, and the press found out about that. And so we were in, I believe it was in the meatpacking district, in about 6 people in New York. And somebody from CBS approached us and asked to enter. And how did they find out? They were vague about that. And we said, no, they couldn't. And so they said, what is the meeting going on? And so Barbara Held was with us. She's a psychologist from Bates. And she said, we're the negatives. We had no idea what that meant. But then people started applying to be a negatier. And they send CVs. And but it wasn't that kind of group. We weren't a revolutionary group. We were just a bunch of people who like to get together and drink and exchange ideas. And some of the people were atheists in the group like her. But that wasn't really. They weren't like radical. They weren't disrespectful of people who need beliefs. And I think that's an important aspect of my approach and hers, that we respect the people's need for beliefs. And we're not destructive about that, but we will point out sometimes for us and for them when the beliefs might not work as well as they're supposed to. I grew up in a context, Chelsea, Massachusetts. It's the smallest, most impoverished municipality in Massachusetts, and it originally was a Jewish ghetto. And in the sense that it was almost primarily, it was an alternative place to Ellis Island for Jews to arrive, and then the Italians came after them. And one of the heroes of that period was Rachel Alger, and he wrote about experiences of upward mobility, and he made so much money doing that. he didn't know what to do with his money at the end of his life, so he formed the National Honor Society, which created scholarships. And it was a whole series of books, and I guess I would be Dirty Dick in that. And as somebody from there who comes from extreme poverty and meets a lot of obstacles, including corruption, and Chelsea was a very, very corrupt city when I was growing up. Even the school board was seized by the state. The city government was arrested after gambling to celebrate an election. And but the idea was that if you did all these things, you could live happily ever after, be the American myth. And I was really impressed with that because I needed that to get out of there. And I was a poster child for the right wing when I left welfare in New London, Connecticut, and went to college. But I felt I was being used. And I really reacted to that. I was a really radical individualist. And I felt I was always responsible for what I did. But I realized that the deck is stacked. You know, the cards are marked, but you're going to do the best you can. And I also, at that time, I was, as I often had been, so-called man of the household, because my mother was without a male partner. And at that time, I had a 100% disabled brother, half-brother. And so it was my job to look after the family. Welfare wasn't enough money when you have a chronically ill person. And so I had to both hustle, though I was very strict Catholic. So I had to do it within the rules. And sometimes you bent the rules, but you had to figure it out. You know, for instance, when there wasn't enough money, I used to collect bottles and bring them back to a grocery store. But that exposed you to bullies. And I found what I could do is I could collect old newspapers and I could clip the coupons out of them and sell the coupons at a discount to the checkers who were corrupt. And I would go try to rationalize that with the priests. And I learned how priests allow you to, going back to, you know, the Reformation, you can not tell the truth and not lie. I could feel morally okay that I was ripping off the supermarket.
So I want to come back to this very interesting story of how you grew up and what kind of path you took to becoming where you are now, because it's a very different one, I think, than many people in academia take.
Sure.
But I wondered, a lot of people might be wondering, what is positive psychology?
We spend most of our lives trying to feel more meaning and happiness. We strive to discover and live what many psychologists and philosophers call the good life. Could it be possible, though, through science and understanding, we can figure out what the good life consists of and teach that to everyone? That, in a nutshell, is what positive psychology hopes to do. Positive psychology is a sub-branch of study within psychology and is defined as the scientific study of what makes life most worth living.
Could you give me a sense of what this movement, I suppose you could call it, is, and who's at the head of it?
Well, definitely, Martin Seligman, I think, is one of the greatest marketeers there's ever been in psychology. And among his many accomplishments is that he was president of APA, and is also inseparable that he developed the learned helplessness theory, which was the underlying framework for a lot of the torture in which psychologists participated. And he may have not approved of it initially, but he certainly didn't object to it becoming a framework, and that the prisoners were to be like they'd be waterboarded. And the direct analogy is the dogs that are drowning in a situation where they're helpless. And the idea is the waterboarding will reduce them to like the dogs, to passivity and to compliance. And on the other hand, I don't think there's a positive psychology and a negative psychology. I think there's just psychology. And there are lots of research on being positive, on being grateful, on being mindful. And the question is, does it meet empirical standards? But in Seligman's framework, it's become much more of a cult or a religion or just a group hug. And you're not supposed to be critical of it. And it often serves other purposes. he has a money-making master's program in applied positive psychology, not in the psychology department of the University of Pennsylvania, but in the education school. And the education school is notorious for its money-making master's programs. So you can get into them without having any qualifications. So when Smirnoff, I think that's his name, the comedian on public radio, wanted to enter the program, he thought it would be great PR, and he accepted him immediately.
I grew up in the former Soviet Union. My parents and I lived in a communal apartment with 9 other families. When my parents wanted to be romantic, they would send me to look out the window. One day my dad said, "So what do you see in the window?" I said, "Our neighbors being romantic." He said, "How can you tell?" I said, "Because their son is looking at me." My parents laughed. At that moment, I felt that I was in the presence of love. As a child, I made the discovery that laughter must be the way people communicate to one another that they're happy. Did you know that there have been actual research into relationship between laughter and happy marriages?
A lot of the people who go into the program, they're not allowed to have scholarships from the university. It's the money-making program, and they have to pay out-of-state tuition fees. And a lot of them go into a wealthy and can afford to do that. And they don't go in with any knowledge of psychological methodology or psychological conditions outside of what they're presented in the program. So it becomes very much an indoctrination. And he throws away a lot of things that would detract numerous things in the traditional psychological literature. Interventions just aren't that good. Assessment is pretty inaccurate. And any interventions based on assessments have to be evaluated. And I was critical of that because I was critical of the role that myths had played in my own upward mobility. It didn't help that he tortured dogs, and they also justified the torture of it was a model for torture of prisoners. I remember the one time I met him was that he was a visitor at Stanford University, and I was working at my lab up the street at the Mental Research Institute. And we had quite a lively debate without him knowing that I had a paper just submitted that was critiquing his original learned helplessness model. And he was pretty outrageous. And then he only later did he figure out who I was, and he regretted some of the things he said. Like one of the things he threatened to sue me about, which he later said publicly, was that he firmly believed that you could be a psychologist and you could be like a rock star and make all the money of a rock star, and you could achieve a celebrity status. When I said that to a newspaper journalist, and she used it in an unflattering way, he threatened to sue me. But then I found out he said the same thing to other people. That was a routine way of talking about himself.
So he shot himself in the foot, basically. But what specifically were you very critical of in terms of you mentioned interventions and their evaluations? Because one of the criticisms that I get all the time is like, geez, Ashley, like, you're way too critical. This stuff would never become as famous as it is, as influential in policy as it is, if it didn't have a firm scientific foundation. So what exactly have you picked out as not great in terms of the science?
First up, about that assumption, I'll get to the specifics. I think lots of times what we accept as evidence or not being evidence-based has little to do with the evidence that is being approached or being presented, but to the structure in which it's being evaluated. And so bad science not only involves bad scientists or confused scientists, but it involves journals who want that and institutions that want that. I remember I wrote an obscure manifesto in, I think, 2010, the role of the critic in health psychology. And I firmly believed at the time that you could train citizen scientists, anybody who wanted to learn, how to evaluate experts and evidence for themselves. But I looked at some of the particular tenets, and they were very weak. Like the idea of practicing gratitude. Of course, it is useful to be grateful. You don't want to be ungrateful, But if it just becomes reflexive, it can get you in trouble if you are grateful to people who don't deserve it or people who exploit your gratitude. And I think even kindness, what's the rock song? Sometimes it's cruel to be kind. I think that sometimes you can hurt people's feelings with your criticism, but if that's your contract to be able to do that, then it's okay. So like when I used to coach top scientists in Europe to write competitive grants, they would actually have to have informed consent with me that I had to write that hurt their feelings, and we could discuss it, but that they had to understand that my motive was in their interest. That too was discussable and debatable. But niceness can be toxic.
What you were saying about cruel to be kind and kind to be cruel really struck a chord with me, because I think people don't realize that the latter has become so powerful now, that now cruelty requires the facade of kindness, that the most cruel and horrific and racist things now get said every day in the guise of like some kind of leftish language of, I don't know, decolonization, all sorts of things, but also this kindly language of helping minorities and so on. I've talked about this endlessly on the podcast. I won't go into it again, but in order to rehash all of these, not even realizing, I suppose I say in order to, it makes it sound causal and conscious, but I think people don't realize that they're rehashing old sort of stereotypes about indigenous people and about Black people and so on as somehow cognitively less or damaged or whatever, but through the narrative of like racism and colonialism and slavery and so on, they say, oh, but it's not your fault, that's why you're damaged, that's why you have these problems. You're like, well, you're still explaining my problems in terms of me being internally damaged, so this sort of kindness is what enables an extraordinary level of cruelty, this sort of paternalistic attempt to explain away problems that are really structural, really difficult to deal with in individualized terms.
I think it's even worse than that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember the close of the movie French Connection, where there's a Frenchman, very dignified, probably even a diplomat, going down the river on a barge, and the cop Poppy is helplessly watching him get away with his white gloves. And I think that a lot of situations that are woke are not what we think it is. It's that somebody like the French diplomat escaping on the barge, being able to keep their gloves clean as someone else did all the dirty work. For example, almost 100 years to the day, there was an election in Philadelphia. And elections were always racially charged and involved lynchings, mostly of Black people, but sometimes of Sicilians. And at that particular point, the Irish were fighting, rival Irish politicians were fighting. So what they did is they weren't very good at fighting, so they brought in Italian hoods from New York. And one side assassinated the candidate on the other and moved some policemen that set off everything. But it was sort of, it was people trying to appear outside agitators or someone else had did that. And they didn't own responsibility. I myself had been savagely mobbed a few times, and often involves because I challenged some sacred cow or some sacred idea. And so someone will say, yeah, but when he wrote this paper on the 8th questionnaire, it was a fig leaf for quietly promoting adult sexual exploitation.
Visit patreon.com/Ashley A. Frawley for part 2.